The morning they dragged Corrie Weston through the center of Hatchford, the sun was already high and cold, and nobody looked away. She was not running. That was the first thing Beckett Slade noticed from the edge of the crowd. A woman being marched through town like that usually fought or folded. Corrie did neither. She walked with her chin down and her wrists bound in front of her, and every step looked like it cost her something. But she kept placing one foot in front of the other, as if the ground itself were the only honest thing left in Hatchford. The deputy gripping her arm was named Ormond, a big man who wore his badge the way some men wore their Sunday hats, not because they earned it, but because somebody handed it to them, and they never gave it back. He shoved her up onto the wooden steps of the land office, which that morning was serving as a makeshift auction platform because the real courthouse was 40 miles south and the circuit judge was 2 weeks out, and the man who had called this gathering did not want to wait. That man was Denton Hargrove. He stood at the top of the steps, a dark coat, one thumb hooked in his watch chain, watching the crowd with the pleasant expression of someone who already knew how the afternoon would end. Hargrove owned the Hatchford Timber Company, the flour mill, and 2 of the 3 water rights along the ridge. He had also, until 11 days ago, employed Corrie Weston's husband, until her husband turned up dead. "People of Hatchford," Hargrove said, loud enough to carry across the mud in the cold, "you know why we're here. This woman stole company ledgers belonging to the Hargrove Timber Enterprise. She is accused of conspiring in the death of my foreman, Mr. Pruitt, whose body was found in the river. She is a liability and a danger, and we are offering her indenture to any man willing to take responsibility for her person." Someone in the crowd whistled low. Someone else muttered something Beckett couldn't hear. Hargrove's voice dropped into something that sounded almost like regret. "Bidding starts at $2. Silence. Then a man near the front laughed. "I'll give you 50 cents. More laughter. Corrie did not look up. Beckett Slade had come to Hatchford from his lumber claim near Redstone Creek for 2 things, a new saw blade and a sack of dried beans. He was 41 years old, wide through the shoulders, with a beard going gray at the jaw and hands that had spent 20 years learning how to be useful. He had not come to watch a woman be sold on the steps of a land office. But he knew what he was looking at. He had seen it before. Not this exactly, but the shape of it. The way a crowd gathered when someone powerful pointed at someone powerless and said, "Here is the source of your trouble." The way people believed it because believing it was easier than looking at the man doing the pointing. His wife, Eleanor, had died 3 years ago. Fever, then gone. He had buried her on the hill above Redstone Creek and come back down the slope, feeling like a man with a compass but no map. Since then, he had mostly kept to himself and his work and his quiet. And he had told himself that was fine. That quiet was not cowardice, that a man who had already lost everything had earned the right to stay out of other people's storms. He believed that right up until Denton Hargrove said, "Going once," and the only sound was wind. Beckett pushed through to the front of the crowd. He reached into his coat and pulled out the money he had been saving since February for a new iron cookstove. $40 folded flat against a card. He peeled off 2 bills. $2, he said. Hargrove looked down at him. Something crossed his face that was not quite surprise. "Slade, $2, Beckett said again. "And you'll have her down from those steps." A murmur moved through the crowd. Ormond looked at Hargrove. Hargrove looked at the bills in Beckett's hand, and whatever he calculated in that moment, he took the money. Because Hargrove was not a man who turned down $2, even when the principle of it offended him. He had not built what he built by letting small amounts go. Beckett climbed the 3 steps, pulled a folding knife from his pocket, and cut the rope from Corrie's wrists. He did not look at the crowd. He put one hand lightly at her elbow and walked her down the steps and through the gathered people, who parted because no one was quite ready to be the person who stopped him. He heard Hargrove behind him, pleasant and cool. "This won't help her, Slade." Beckett kept walking. He had left his horse tied at the post outside the hardware store. He helped Corrie up into the saddle without ceremony, then untied the reins and led the horse out of Hatchford on foot, because there was only the one animal. And she looked like she needed to be off her legs more than he did. She did not speak until they were clear of town, past the last fence post, and into the open timber road heading north. "I don't know you," she said. "No, why did you do that?" Beckett thought about it for a step or two. Because no one else was going to. She was quiet after that. He did not press her. His claim was 3 miles up the Redstone Road. It was not much. A 2-room cabin, a lean-to where he kept his tools, a woodpile that was better organized than anything else in his life. He had built it himself the first winter after Eleanor died, not because he needed a new cabin, but because he needed something to do with his hands that wasn't grief. He helped Corrie down from the horse at the gate, then showed her inside and put a kettle on the stove. She sat in the chair nearest the door, which he noticed but didn't comment on. People who'd been handled the way she'd been handled tended to want to know where the exits were. By the firelight, he could see what the 2 days in Hargrove's custody had cost her. A bruise along her left cheekbone, yellowing at the edges, dried blood at her temple from a cut that hadn't been cleaned. Her dress was not her own. It was too large in the shoulders, too short at the hem, like something grabbed off a pile rather than chosen. But her eyes were clear. That was what struck him. Whatever had been done to her, her eyes were entirely clear. "I need to know what you're in the middle of," Beckett said. "Not because I need a reason to have gotten you out, but because if men come to my door, I need to know what they're coming for." Corrie looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. "My name is Corrie Weston," she said. "My husband, Dale, worked timber for Hargrove for 6 years. He was their lead scaler, the one who measured the logs and recorded the board footage for payment. 2 months ago, he started telling me that the numbers weren't adding up, that Hargrove was recording false footage to underpay the crews." She looked down at her hands, which were folded in her lap. Dale kept his own count, wrote it all down in a separate ledger. Crew names, dates, the real footage versus what Hargrove was filing. And Hargrove found out. Dale came home on a Thursday night and said he'd confronted Pruitt about it. Pruitt was Hargrove's foreman. He said Pruitt laughed at him. Her voice did not waver, but it went very flat. 2 days later, Dale was in the river. The fire popped. Outside, the wind came up through the pines. "The ledger," Beckett said. "Dale hid it before he died. He didn't tell me where, or maybe he didn't have time." She looked up then. "But I found something else. In the lining of Dale's work coat. A letter, from Pruitt to Hargrove, written 6 weeks before Dale died. It names the amounts, the scheme, how to keep the timber crews underpaid without them being able to prove it." She paused. "It also says that Dale Weston was asking too many questions and needed to be resolved." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "Where is the letter?" Beckett asked. For the first time, Corrie almost smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had survived by being careful. She reached down and pressed 2 fingers to the inside hem of her boot. "I sewed it into the lining before Hargrove's men reached the house." Beckett was quiet. He stood up, moved to the window, looked out at the dark tree line, then back at her. "The county seat is Dalton," he said. "Judge Orvis holds circuit there. He's not owned by anyone I know of." Corrie's eyes went to the window. "Hargrove has men between here and Dalton. I know. And the road through Copper Gap is the only one that doesn't add 2 days. I know that too." She looked at him directly. "This isn't your trouble, Mr. Slade." "No," he said. "But I'm in it now regardless." He did not sleep well that night. He sat by the door with his rifle across his knees and listened to the wind work through the pines, which was a sound he usually found settling, but which tonight carried too many possibilities. In the morning, Corrie was already up before him. She had put more wood on the fire and set water to boil, and she was sitting at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil, writing in a careful hand. "What's that?" he asked. Everything I remember Dale telling me. Dates, amounts, crew names. If something happens to the letter, there should be a record. She looked up. My memory's better than most people's. Beckett poured himself a cup of water and watched her write for a moment. You were a schoolteacher, he said. It was not a question. She paused her pencil. Before Dale, how did you know? The way you hold the pencil, and the way you were walking yesterday. Chin down, but spine straight. Like you'd spent years telling yourself not to slouch in front of a classroom. She looked at him for a beat, then went back to writing. 8 years. One-room school in Cutter's Bend. Closed when the mine closed and half the families left. They left the cabin before dawn the next morning. Beckett packed light. Dried meat, cartridges, a wool blanket, the good knife. He gave Corrie his spare coat, which was too wide for her but warmer than what she had, and she pulled it on without argument. He had told her about Eleanor the night before, briefly. And she had not offered condolences in the way people sometimes did, which made the grief feel smaller rather than larger. She had just said, I'm sorry you lost her. That was enough. The trail to Copper Gap ran northeast through old-growth pine, climbing slowly for the first 4 miles, then dropping hard into a narrow river valley before the switchbacks up the other side. Beckett knew this ground. He had logged the lower stretch before Eleanor got sick, and he had come back through it twice in the years since, more for the walking than anything else. They were 2 hours out when the horse began to pull against the lead rope. Beckett stopped. Corrie stopped beside him without being asked. He listened. Below them on the trail, maybe a 1/4 mile back, he could hear the creak and shuffle of horses moving through underbrush, trying not to sound like much. At least 2, possibly 3. Off the trail, he said quietly. They moved into the timber on the uphill side, leaving the horse tied to a branch. He hated doing it, but there was no help for it, and worked their way 30 yards up the slope to a granite outcropping that gave them a clean sightline back down the trail. 2 riders, both wearing work coats, no badges, but one of them had a loop of red cord hanging from his saddle horn, which was what Hargrove's contract men had used as a marker, since before Beckett could remember. Hargrove's, he said. Corrie's voice was steady. Are they going to find us? Not if we stay still. They waited. The riders passed below on the trail, moving slowly, checking both sides. Beckett watched until they rounded the bend and the sound of them faded south. Then he let out a slow breath. They'll come back when the trail goes cold, he said. Corrie was already looking up the slope. Is there another way over the ridge? Longer. Rougher. But clear. As far as I know. Then we go that way. He looked at her. She was already moving uphill. They lost 3 hours on the hard route, but they did not see the riders again. By the time they came down the far side of the ridge and picked up the Dalton Road, the afternoon light was going orange through the pines, and Beckett's knees were reminding him. He was not 30 anymore. Corrie had said nothing about her own feet, though once crossing a frozen creek, she had gripped his arm to keep her balance, and he had felt how cold her hands were through the coat. They stopped at an abandoned stage relay station 3 miles short of Dalton. The roof was sound if not watertight. He got a fire going in the old iron stove, and she sat close to it, finally letting herself be still. My husband was a good man, she said. Not as if she were telling Beckett, but as if she were reminding herself. Not a brave one. He wasn't built for fighting, but when he saw something wrong, he could not make himself look away from it. A pause. That's what got him killed. Beckett turned a piece of dried meat over in his hands. It's also what's going to win this. She looked at him. Because he wrote it down, Beckett said, and you carried it. She looked at the fire for a long time after that. Then quietly, do you think the judge will listen? I think Hargrove has not had a reason to buy Judge Orvis yet, which means Orvis still belongs to the law. He met her eyes. That's a smaller window than it should be, but it's a window. In the early morning dark, Corrie woke to the sound of a horse on the road outside. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, hand going to the side of her boot where the letter was. Beckett was already at the relay station door, rifle in hand, watching through the crack. One horse, one rider, moving at a road pace, not a hunting pace. He relaxed slightly. Corrie did not completely, but she sat back down. "Old habit?" he asked, without looking back at her. "Since Dale," she said. He understood that. After Eleanor, he had woken for 6 months at every sound the cabin made, heart running before he was conscious, reaching for a rifle against a threat that was not there. Grief made the body believe it had to stand guard over everything it still had left. They reached Dalton before the morning church bells finished ringing. The town was larger than Hatchford, a proper main street, a bank, a real courthouse, with a carved wooden seal above the door. Sheriff's office next to the land registry, 2 hotels, the smell of a working bakery somewhere on the north end. Beckett had not been to Dalton in 2 years. He kept to the edge of the street out of habit. Judge Monroe Orvis was a small, neat man of about 60 with a white mustache and the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades listening to people lie to him and had gotten very good at hearing it. He received them in his chambers at 8:30, a fact which required Beckett to present himself to 2 different clerks and a bailiff, but which eventually occurred. Corrie stood before the judge's desk and put the letter on it without preamble. Orvis read it. He read it again. Then he looked up at her. "Where did you get this?" "My husband's coat lining. He must have put it there the night before he went to confront Pruitt." "And you've had it since?" "Sewn into my boot, since before Hargrove's men came to the house." Orvis looked at the letter a 3rd time. His expression did not change much, but something behind his eyes went very still and then very deliberate, the way a man looks when he is deciding whether to do a hard thing. "Mrs. Weston," he said, "I want you to understand what this will look like in a courtroom. Hargrove's attorneys will say this letter is fabricated. They will say your grief has made you desperate. They will say a widow with motive cannot be trusted to produce honest evidence." Corrie's hands were folded in front of her. Her spine was exactly straight. "I know what they'll say. And I have the original letter in Pruitt's own hand, with specific figures that can be checked against Hargrove's filed timber records. I have my husband's memory in my own handwriting, and I have." She glanced at Beckett, a witness who saw what Hargrove called a legitimate legal proceeding when he had me sold on the steps of a land office. Orvis looked at Beckett. "That's accurate," Beckett said. The judge was quiet for a moment. Then he set the letter carefully to one side and reached for a piece of paper. "I'm going to need you to make a sworn statement, both of you." He looked at Corrie over his mustache. "And I'm going to send a man to Hatchford today to pull Hargrove's filed timber records before he has any reason to think they matter." He wrote something on the paper, then looked up once more. "Mrs. Weston, I want to be honest with you. This will not be quick, and Hargrove is a powerful man who will spend money on this." "I know," Corrie said. "But the law exists for the moments when powerful men go too far. And I believe," he tapped the letter, "this is one of those moments." Corrie looked at the letter on his desk, at the words written in Pruitt's hand 6 weeks before her husband went into the river, at the figures, the dates, the small cold entry that said, "Weston is a problem that needs resolving." "My husband believed the same thing," she said. "It cost him everything." "Yes," Orvis said quietly, "which is why I intend to make sure it also costs Denton Hargrove everything." The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Beckett stayed in Dalton, at the cheaper of the 2 hotels. Because Corrie needed someone who was not attached to the case to sit outside the hearing room door during the depositions and who could be trusted not to talk. He was good at both of those things. Hargrove's attorneys arrived on the 5th day. 2 men from the city, in identical gray overcoats, who moved through Dalton with the polished efficiency of people who won by making things complicated until the other side ran out of patience or money. They filed 4 motions before the week was out. Orvis denied 3 and took the 4th under advisement, which was the judicial equivalent of setting it on a shelf and leaving it there. Corrie testified for 4 hours. Beckett was not allowed in the room, but the bailiff told him afterward that she had not wavered on a single date or figure, and that when Hargrove's lead attorney suggested her grief had affected her reliability, she had looked at him calmly and said, "I kept records because my husband taught me that honest numbers don't lie, and I believe him now the same as I believed him then." The letter was authenticated by a documents examiner brought down from the Capitol. Hargrove's filed timber records showed a systematic difference from independently calculated footage going back 4 years, a shortfall that, spread across 200 and some logging crew members, amounted to wages Hargrove had collected and not paid. The foreman Pruitt, who Beckett had expected to be beyond reach, turned out to be alive, and in a boarding house in Red Rock, 2 towns east, where he had retreated after learning that Hargrove had begun telling people that Pruitt was responsible for Dale Weston's death. Self-preservation proved to be a more reliable motive than loyalty. When Orvis's deputy knocked on his door, Pruitt opened it, and 3 days later he was seated across from the court recorder with his hat in both hands, confirming the contents of his own letter line by line. Hargrove himself was brought to Dalton on the 15th day. He sat at the defendant's table, looking less diminished than Beckett had expected. Men like that rarely looked as small as they should. But there was something careful in his eyes now that had not been there on the steps of the land office. He was calculating still, but he was calculating against a changed board. The Attorney General of the Territory, who had been apprised of the case, arrived on the morning of the hearing and sat in the second row. Hargrove's attorneys made their arguments. They were thorough and well organized and entirely insufficient. When Corrie took the stand, she carried nothing with her. She had memorized everything she needed. She spoke clearly and without performance, describing what Dale had told her, what she had found in his coat, what she had done with it, and what Denton Hargrove had arranged to have done to her on the steps of a land office in Hatchford. "Were you afraid?" Hargrove's attorney asked on cross. "Yes," Corrie said. "I was afraid every day from the morning I found Dale's letter until the morning I placed it on Judge Orvis's desk. A beat. After that I was only waiting. Waiting for what? For the truth to do what truth does when it's given the room." The room was full. People from Hatchford had come. Some from guilt, some from curiosity, some, Beckett thought, from the particular human need to watch the story end. He saw Ormond, the deputy, in the third row with his badge conspicuously absent from his coat. He saw 2 of the timber crew foremen who had worked under Dale's scale records. He saw a woman he didn't know weeping quietly in the back, and he thought she might be the wife of one of the underpaid cutters. Hargrove was found liable on 11 counts. His timber operations were ordered suspended pending restitution calculations. Criminal charges were filed in the matter of Dale Weston's death, with Pruitt's testimony as the primary evidence and Hargrove's own correspondence as the frame. It was not a quick verdict. It was a just one. Afterward, in the courthouse yard, Beckett found Corrie standing near the gate, looking at nothing in particular. She still had his spare coat on. He had stopped noticing that several days ago. "What will you do?" he asked. She considered it. "There will be restitution proceedings. The court will want the timber crew records. I'll help with that." A pause. "After that, I don't know. The house in Hatchford isn't. I don't think I can go back to that house." Beckett looked at the mountains north of Dalton, the same range that backed up against his claim. The snow was still heavy on the upper ridges, but the lower slopes were starting to go green. "There's land adjacent to mine that's been empty 3 years," he said. "Good soil. Not too much clearing needed." He stopped. "I'm not making an offer. I want to say that plainly. I know what you've just been through, and I know you're not looking for that. I'm only saying there's land if you want land, and a neighbor who's good at staying out of other people's way when they need it." Corrie looked at him for a moment. A long moment. "You paid $2 for me," she said. "I did. I've been thinking about that." She reached into the pocket of the coat, his coat, and held out 2 folded bills. He didn't take them. That wasn't a purchase, he said. That was an argument. With a crowd, she held the bills a moment longer. Then she put them back in the pocket. I want to see the land, she said. They rode back north together the following morning, through Copper Gap, along the Redstone Road, into the quiet pine country, where the creek ran clear and cold even in summer, and the only sounds were the kind that didn't require anything from you. Beckett pointed out the boundary markers of his claim. The good spring on the eastern side, the stand of cedar that would make strong fence posts, the slope that caught afternoon sun. Corrie walked the adjacent parcel on her own, which he thought was the right instinct. She was gone about an hour. When she came back, there was something settled in her face that had not quite been there before. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but possibility. The particular expression of a person who has found something that might, in time, belong to them. It's good land, she said. It is, Beckett agreed. They stood there for a moment in the easy silence of people who have been through something hard together and come out the other side still speaking to each other, which is not nothing. The creek ran somewhere in the trees below them. A hawk turned slow circles above the ridge. Dale kept his count, Corrie said at last quietly, not to Beckett specifically. He wrote it all down. Even when he knew the risk, she looked at the land. He did that for the crew. For men he barely knew, because the numbers were wrong, and he couldn't make himself look away. He sounds like someone worth grieving, Beckett said. He was. A breath. He was. Above the door of the Redstone, there is a small tin box now nailed flat to the frame in the place where some men hang a horseshoe. Inside it, folded careful against the weather, is the receipt from the Hatchford land office. $2. One woman signed by Denton Hargrove the morning before everything he had built came down around him. Beckett did not nail it there as a trophy. He nailed it there as a reminder that a life can be priced cheaply by people who do not understand its worth, and that the right response to that is not to argue the price. It is to make the purchase meaningless. It is to prove by living well in honest ground, by keeping your own count and writing it down, that the number they put on you was never the truth of what you were. The land next door has a cabin now, too. It went up in the late summer, with help from 2 of the timber crew families, who had come to Dalton for the hearing, and stayed in the county after the restitution was settled. Corrie Weston designed the floor plan herself. She put the windows facing east.